All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. It's time to get started again for the main event. We've enjoyed local poets. We've enjoyed a little wine, a little beer, a little soda, a lot of conversation. Welcome back. If you were not here earlier, I asked folks to hold up their cell phones, to turn them off. And if you missed that announcement, I'm going to repeat it. If you have a cell phone, would you kindly turn it off or disengage it so it doesn't interrupt our speakers today? That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. How many of you are here for poetry? Well, and I guess the rest of you are here for barbecue, right? How many of you are here for, yeah.
Got a man over here.
Yeah, that's right. We're here for poetry. Well, welcome back. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sponsoring and participating in the Poetry and Barbecue for Laura Writing Jackson Foundation. This is a wonderful occasion. My friend Sean Sexton does a wonderful job helping to organize this event. Sean, thank you so much for all that you do. This is such a wonderful thing for our community. I'm going to give you an opportunity to make a couple of announcements.
Okay. So only with a great board do I do this. Only. And would you all please stand up? Our board, I know that most of you are here. I'm amazed. And this is, I've got two things we want to do before we start. And the first one is, we have a beautiful model in our audience who is going to come and walk the gangplank and show off our lovely Laura Writing Jackson t-shirt. Ren, who is the volunteer. And don't go anywhere yet. She's the volunteer par excellence, and I want to give you one of everybody's books. Everybody. And now we always try. I read in the early hour. I read an Earth Day poem written by Laura Writing Jackson, and now we're going to do a love poem. Carrie Adams, I'm going to ask to come forward. It's I'm going to let her tell you what it is.
Good afternoon, poetry lovers. Speaking of lovers, that's what we were looking for to go along with our theme today, to find a Laura Writing Jackson poem that could help go along with the theme of coupledom and love and passion and all of those things, and they do exist. So with the help of Peggy Friedman, who is Laura's biographer, we were able to settle on a poem this morning. Now, it is a 14-stanza poem, so with Peggy's assistance, we have trimmed it to 4. So I will start with the opening of the poem for 3 stanzas, and then I'll read the concluding stanza at the end. So this poem is called When Love Becomes Words. The yet undone become the unwritten by the activity of others, and the immobile pen of ourselves lifted in postponed readiness over the yet unsmooth paper of time. Themes of the writing table now, all those implicit projects by our minds rescued from enactment. The lost literature, which only death reads. And we expect works of one another of exceeding not so much loveliness or fame among our physical size, as quietness, eventful, not beyond thought, which moves unstrangely without the historic sword flash. And I shall say to you, there is needed now a poem upon love, to forget the kiss and be more love than kiss to the lips. Or, failing your heart's talkativeness, I shall write this spoken kiss myself, imprinting it on the mouth of time, perhaps too finally, but slowly, since execution now is prudent with the reflective sleep the tongue takes between thought and said. The final stanza reads as thus. And then to words again, after, was it? A kiss or exclamation, between face and face, too sudden to record. Our love being now a span of mind, whose bridge, not the droll body, is striding the waters of disunion with sulky grin and groaning valor. We can make love miraculous, as joining thought with thought and annexed, which is done not by crossing over, but by knowing the words for what we mean. We forbear to move, it seeming to us now more like ourselves to keep the written watch, and let the reach of love surround us with the warm accusation of being poets.
So we've gotten to that moment. I'm going to introduce all of our poets now and try to do so briefly because I want to put the money on the screen. Chelsea Rathburn is author of 3 full-length poetry collections, most recently Still Life with Mother and Knife. Rathburn's poems have appeared in the nation's most esteemed journals, including Poetry, Atlantic Monthly, The New Republic, Southern Review, New England Review, and Plowshares, among others. In March 2019, she was appointed Poet Laureate of Georgia. Barbara Hamby is the author of 7 books of poems. Most recently, Holo Holo.
One more time. Holo.
Holo Holo.
You got it.
You're not impressed? I mean, you know. All right. She was a 2010 Guggenheim Fellow in Poetry, and her poems have appeared in many magazines. Make Me Green, The New Yorker, Poetry, American Poetry Review, Plowshares, Yale Review, and the New York Times. She teaches at FSU, where she is Distinguished University Scholar. James Davis May has a book debuting here in Vero Beach, truly. And it's fabulous. He's the author, most recently, of that book, Unusually Grand Ideas. His previous collection, Unquiet Things, was published by LSU Press in 2016 and named runner-up for the Georgia Author of the Year Award in Poetry. He is an assistant professor of English at Mercer, where he directs the creative writing program, and a 2021 NEA for the Arts Fellow in Poetry. I give you Jim May. Of course, you know, you had to be last.
It's a way of life for some of us.
Yeah, right. David Kirby is the Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professor of English at FSU. Among his many awards, the Guggenheim, the Florida Humanities Council's Lifetime Achievement Award for Writing, no small thing at all. And Kirby's many books include I Think I'm Going to Call My Wife Paraguay, A Wilderness of Monkeys, and more than this. And so we're ready to start. I want to leave the podium assuring you that we have a fabulous selection of their books in the back, and Chad from the Vero Beach Book Center is there. And we will plan when we're decamping to the dinner for you to come in, and they will be set up to sign books and greet you and meet with you and starve just a little, and we'll bring them wine and beer. Can I take your order right now? Never mind. But anyway, they have it figured out what they're going to do. I'm going to get out of the way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, everybody, for coming out on this lovely day. Why you're not out kayaking on one of these beautiful bodies of water, I don't know. If I could do it and have a headset and come in on the screen, I might, but then I would miss being in your company. Yeah, we're Chelsea and Jim and Barbara and I have known each other for a long time, but we've never done this together. So we're kind of like a band, like a bad band with 4 lead singers. We're kind of fighting to get up here. And how many of you have been in musical groups? Folk trio, rock band, symphony orchestra? Yeah, a bunch of you. And you know that any self-respecting band would get together at least 2 weeks early and rehearse. So we're not that kind of band, and we don't really quite know what we're doing, but we're going to try to put on a good show for you. I don't know whether it's going to be up to the level of a performance by Robert Coates. Does anybody here know who Robert Coates is? I'll be very disappointed if you actually do, because he's one of the most obscure people in the world. I just stumbled across him a couple of days ago. I was looking up something else. And he's known as the worst actor in history, which is probably not true, because there are probably people who weren't famous enough to be noticed as the worst actor in history. But here's one little story about Robert Coates. He was touring in the late 19th century with a Shakespearean troupe in East Texas, and they were putting on Romeo and Juliet, and he was Romeo. And when it came time for him to take the poison and commit suicide and perish, first, he took his handkerchief out and he dusted the floor. And then he took his hat off and put it on a pillar. And then he took the little vial that probably had some lemonade or something in it and took it. And then he died so excellently and bombastically and operatically and histrionically that there was this tremendous applause and then a moment of silence. And from the audience, a single voice in the back cried, "Die again, Romeo." And so he said, "Okay," and he proceeded to die, and they did that 5 times. So I wish we could do that for you today, but we're going to do our best. And we met with our masters and the directors before and asked if there was going to be Q&A, but we were ordered to give you just 100% straight up poetry, but it's going to be better than that, because afterwards we're going to be back here eating the barbecue and drinking what's on offer. And so we'd be happy to talk to you then, sign books, and do whatever you want. So the best I can do right now is say, ladies and gentlemen, Chelsea Rathburn.
All right, thank you, David. David mentioned that we've known each other a long time. He was actually my first poetry professor. I went to Florida State in 1993, and so I've known him a long time. So our plan, such as it is we are going to, rather than each one of us come up and stand here for a while, we're going to read. Each of us is going to read for a little while, and then kind of see what that sparks in somebody else at the table. So we'll be taking turns. My most recent book, Still Life with Mother and Knife, really has nothing to do with marriage. It's about motherhood. It's about girlhood, motherhood. It's largely about postpartum depression. And so I didn't feel like that was the best starting point today, given the theme. Luckily, my second book, which is called A Raft of Grief, it begins with the dissolution of my first marriage. So it begins a divorce, and then about halfway through the book, this dashing young gentleman who is sitting down at the end of the table there, Jim May, kind of appears on the scene. And so I'm going to going to start with two poems from this book. One is short, one is quite short, and the other's just a little bit longer. This first one is called Apology. And so when the first love poems appear in this book, they're a little uncertain. They're a little nervous. You know, is this real? I'm considerably older than my husband, by the way. Not anymore, but when we met. The age gap has really shrunk over the years, but at the time it seemed immense. So this poem is called Apology. Forgive me, love, for almost enjoying your nightmare, the one where I had disappeared or been taken or left. A dream so clear you woke me calling my name, your nickname for me, a single crushed syllable, from whatever dark plane you were trapped in until I shook you from it. Of all the ways I love my name on your voice, traveling up from our kitchen or study on some practical, fact-finding mission, dutiful as a carrier pigeon, or on the far end of a phone, or in the last long, impractical motions of desire, I think I liked it best breaking my sleep that night. For what more could I ask from my life than to be wanted like that? And when I let myself be found, and you clung to me, selflessly, shaking, and told me the dream, I almost wished that I were lost, that you might look for me. And then this next poem is set in Las Vegas, in one of the casinos, one of the casino lobbies. Right, so this is called Among the Animals. Is there any habitat less natural than the lobby of a Las Vegas hotel? Yet here we gather, hoping for some glimpse of the wild. And if this lion's den is not, as the brochures suggest, a mini African safari, it's still oddly impressive. Towering rocks, the pride stretching out across them, and families crowding in for photo ops, only inch-thick glass between them and the oblivious beasts. Mostly, the tourists shoot their own faces looking back at them. Mostly, the lions loll, waiting for feeding time. A recording tells us where they really live, a ranch outside of town, and what they eat and how they've come to love or tolerate their handlers. The recording tells us that they get daily baths, their hair conditioned and blown dry, and we chuckle politely, picturing lions vain as Vegas showgirls. Watching them lick meat delicately from their handlers' fingers, we are supposed to see them, I think, as giant house cats. Then something unscripted. A lioness strides across the rocks and bites her mate hard on the shoulder. And how can he resist? Mounting, he thrusts 4 times, then pulls away, rolls over, and falls soundly asleep. The laughter rippling through the crowd, the wives nudging husbands, the voices of children asking what the joke is become part of the joke. And will you laugh if I tell you that I see something sexy in it too? Not in the lion's pitiful work, but in his mate's open display of desire, the singular wanting, not the loneliness after. Will your reflection slide across the space between us and take my reflection's hand?
I guess it makes sense for me to come up next. It's funny, Chelsea's third book or most recent is about postpartum depression, and my most recent book, the one that's being released today, is about clinical depression. So we're really fun at parties. But I figured maybe not open with poems from that one. So I wanted, Chelsea talked about this other husband that appears at the beginning of her second book, and I actually have a poem to him. And so I thought I'd read that, and he is not here, so I'm okay. So this is to my lover's ex-husband. This morning, looking behind the bed in the guest room as I prepared it for company, you must have stayed there in the last few nights of the marriage. I found your vomit, long since dried, spackled across the wall, and relieved of its scent, which, from what I've heard, was probably a bourbon with accents of barley and hops. And yesterday, as the Cardinals lost the feeders to the Jays, Chelsea and I spent a long time ripping the English ivy from the lawn. We talked about you, the pain you caused her. Mostly, though, we cursed you for doing nothing about the ivy when years ago you told her you were going to do something about the ivy. You've become almost a god, some genius loci of neglect, indifference, and mistakes. Yet I know somewhere someone might be thinking the same about me. The woman I moved to Houston with, married now to the second bassoonist in the symphony, no doubt recites my faults. And he has promised himself and her that he will be better than me. And he is. They probably even have jokes where my secrets, once promised as secrets, wait faithfully at the punchline. Or if they're past that, it's because they bonded over talks about how I hurt her, talked her into moving to the armpit of Texas, only to leave her 3 months later. Which isn't true exactly, but I scrubbed the wall. The water softens this crust and revives for a moment your bile. It's watering stench. The next poem, no, sorry. No one claps for bile. This next one is, well, it's not much I have to say about this poem. It's Nostos, it's Greek for homecoming. And it's to Chelsea, of course. We had not quite been arguing that night, but talking, discussing how I answer any mood of yours that falls below cheery contentment with a litany of solutions, as if trying to help you find the right word for a crossword puzzle. Sometimes the heart wants to be sad and say so and be heard, you said, or seemed to be saying as we followed our dogs out the door, into the yard, the carport light startling awake at our presence, and then nodding off again. You'll remember that it was late, our neighbors hours into sleep, so we spoke softly, even as we began to really argue, this time about who locked the door on our way out. You'll remember that we gave up our prosecutions when we realized one of us had to hold the brittle ladder while the other climbed to the window we thought might be unlocked. Part cat burglar, part narcissistic voyeur, I paused after unfolding myself into the room, observing what we were when we weren't there. The television mid-conversation prattling on without us, my beer cold, still unmoved. You'll remember how the tails behind you wagged, how happy we were to have back what we had. I remember I felt so heroic giving that to you by just opening the door, which I can tell you now, I'm certain I shut. Two things about that poem. One, I remember writing it and being like, oh, okay, I think I got a poem here. And then I realized that Chelsea's my first reader and I had to give it to her and I thought, oh, damn it. And then she read it and she said, I knew it. I knew it was you. And actually, it appeared in a magazine called Rattle, and years later, when it appeared, David Kirby actually sent me this very nice note. I felt so flattered. And I said, if I wrote to you, I think, if I wrote a poem for every time I messed up and did something wrong to Chelsea, I'd have 3 volumes of poetry. And you responded back, poetry writing like that pays the bills in this house. So, next up, Barbara Hamby.
I'm going to read a new poem from the book I'm working on, and it's something I've been contemplating for a long time. I think that when you've been married 42 years, you realize you've been really lucky. And so just thinking about luck and all of its permutations in my life. Ode on Luck. What was I thinking when I got into cars with boys I hardly knew and drove to houses out in the country where my screams would be muffled by the oaks and pines and the teeming carpet of mushrooms, too stupid to know I wasn't even close to being free, though I thought I was. But all that happened was we listened to Blood on the Tracks and tried to write down lyrics in the flittering of candles. And I was dropped off at my apartment, all too alive to the possibilities of mayhem. Where was I going when I walked down the streets in my armor of beauty and youth, lying in the sun and thinking of Anais Nin in Paris, Rimbaud in Abyssinia, Kafka in Prague? How did I translate my dreams into Italian? Not by planning, that's for sure, because I had no plans unless you could call reading a plan or daydreaming a plan or making soup a plan. So if I could ask Lady Luck what was the secret to wooing her, she might say not giving a fig was a big part of it. Also being happy with a stack of books and infinite cups of tea. And watching those bummer foreign films like The Marriage of Maria Brown and Last Year at Marienbad, and throwing the tarot 100 million times to see what was going to happen in the future when it was going to happen anyway, or visiting psychics who were canny in the extreme, figuring out pretty quickly that when they told me I was going to have 2, 3, 6 children, the look on my face meant that this was not my dream come true. Though there was the one in Houston who said that in a few days I was going to have someone scream at me, but not to get involved because I had nothing to do with what was going on. And a few days later, that's what happened. One of my best students started screaming at me, but it was because her mother was trying to take her daughter from her. And I was a great stand-in, maybe looked like her mother, so that was a piece of luck, me being tipped off by the psychic and Deborah having someone to yell at, i.e. me, her poetry mom, who in no way wanted her daughter. And I've had my share of mommies saying snarky things to me on this same subject because they had no idea how much work children are, even though they're adorable. But being the oldest in a big family, I knew. So that too was a piece of luck. Though when I was changing my little brother's diaper, it didn't really look like it. But that's the thing about Lady Luck. She can show up dressed in rags, smoking a corncob pipe, and then reappear 20 years later looking like Glinda in The Wizard of Oz. It being a matter of translating your own life to yourself, which is what I'm doing every day, interpreting my own language into an English that drives a spear into my heart. And I'll tell you who's lucky. Everybody and nobody in the same milkshake. You put in a scoop of chocolate, a scoop of raspberry dishwater sorbet, a squirt of kerosene, and lo and behold, there's a cherry. And what can you do but put it on top?
It's a little early in the show, but I'm beginning to see a couple of themes developing here. One is the physical side of love, which can involve everything from the physical side of love to climbing up a window and getting the door that you lock, and then the sort of the quiet satisfaction side. Either way you do it, these poems are hard to write. They're really hard. You know, all poems are hard to write. Crystal and Jean and the people who read before and everybody up here, I'm sure, will tell you poems are hard to write. But love poems are really hard to write. You know, Jim talked about giving a poem to Chelsea, and that. You know, you're kind of like the guy who's playing the guitar. You say, hey, I wrote a song, and, you know, the girlfriend has to sit there and listen to it and kind of go, yeah, it's good, you know. So, you know, the guy's performing, and then the girlfriend has to perform too, and then, you know, you have to bring it out into the world. Plus, there's just all the mechanics. And that's why the novelists have something that we can't. And that's that 5 letter word later. You know how you're reading in a novel and it says, you know, James Bond and somebody, you know, move toward the bedroom. Chapter 6, later, you know, because all that stuff is just so darn hard to describe. And I'll tell you though, so you can write your own poems this way. The best way to do it is just kind of don't think about it or write sort of adjacent to the actual experience itself. I read a poem last night at Marie's lovely house about, well, the name of the poem, I'll let you use your imagination. It was called I Wish I Were a Cannibal. Are you getting some images? Anyway, and Cynthia, you jumped up and said, "Can I get a copy of that book?" And I said, "You sure can." Just see Chad and James in the back of the room, and yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but I'm not going to read that poem, but I'm going to read another one. It's called "Kissing." Barbara and I, one of the lucky things of our lives is that we both work at Florida State University, which has been our travel agent for years, because there are all these wonderful campuses: Valencia, Florence, London, Paris, all over the world, where we can go and teach for a term. They give you a plane ticket and a place to stay, and they actually keep paying your salary as well. So been all to these places, and our favorite one is Florence. We always love to go back to Florence, where we spend a certain amount of time in the Uffizi gallery. And you know what's in the Uffizi, right? There's a lot of churchy kind of things. In fact, I was there once with a group, and there were two young women looking at a Madonna and Child, and one young woman said to the other young woman, "Why is it always a boy baby?" And the first one says, "Well, that's Jesus." And the other one said, "Well, I'm Jewish. We don't know about that." And she said, "Well, I mean, you've heard of Jesus, right? You've heard of Thomas Jefferson and John Quincy Adams, people like that. But I was raised Catholic. How many of you were raised Catholic? Okay. How many of you were in bands and were also raised Catholic? That's a very small group. We'll have our meeting outside and talk about those two experiences. But anyway, you look at all these pictures, and you still keep working over and over again. I realize the Catholics don't have a copyright on it, but if you know anything about the Christian religion, you're always trying to figure out the virgin birth and all that. So I wrote a poem called "Kissing." Everyone likes it, right? Mafiosi, grandmas, lovers, especially lovers. Which brings us to the question, did Joseph ever kiss Mary? In the Uffizi, if you look at pictures of Mary and Joseph and wonder if he ever tried to, Okay, not that, but didn't he at least try to kiss her? In Gentile de Fabriano's painting, Joseph looks too tired to nod to the Magi as they arrive with their knickknacks, much less offer them a seat, cup of wine, piece of pita bread, whereas Lorenzo Monaco's Joseph is fit, alert, not old at all, or at least no older than I, whose days of producing a photo ID in order to buy a down-market beer or rum Collins are behind him by decades, yet who is as fond of kissing as ever. Fonder, really. What happens when we kiss? Scientists say our brains create a chemical cocktail consisting of dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. Dopamine stimulates the same area of the brain activated by heroin and cocaine, resulting in euphoria and addictive behavior, whereas oxytocin, which is released during childbirth and breastfeeding, fosters feelings of affection and attachment, and serotonin reaches levels in the brain when people kiss that look a lot like those of someone with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is why the brain scan of a person who's just sitting there minding his or her business looks like a satellite image of North Korea at night, whereas a scan of the same brain of that person kissing looks like Times Square on New Year's Eve. I wonder if the memory of a good kiss can stay with us for years. I mean, we can't say what love is anyway. Raymond Carver says, it ought to make us feel ashamed when we talk as though we know what we're talking about when we talk about love. But a kiss, that's something else. That right there is a whole different ball game, shooting match, kettle of fish. That's the kind of thing that gets folks sexed up. It's like when Dante sees Beatrice and says, here is a God stronger than I who is coming to rule over me, even though he never kisses her at all. And Catherine Earnshaw in Wuthering Heights to say of Edgar Linton, I love the ground under his feet, the air over his head, and everything he touches, and every word he says. I love all his looks and all his actions and him entirely and altogether, even though it turns out that her true love is Heathcliff. Oh, coulda, woulda, shoulda. Love is love and not fade away, says Buddy Holly, also the Rolling Stones. Of course Joseph kissed Mary, and she kisses him back. Don't they look happy? And then Jesus is born. It's a miracle. Yes, so that's from Help Me Information. I should I should dedicate that poem. In fact, I should dedicate a lot of my poems, maybe a future book sometime, to Wikipedia, because I didn't know all that stuff about dopamine and serotonin, of course. But isn't it great when somebody else writes your poems for you? You know, so thank you, anonymous authors there. So, well, that kind of opens the door to the physical side. Anybody want to get physical or be spiritual or? Okay, all right, good. Chelsea Rathburn, one more time.
All right. So I mentioned this book is mostly motherhood, and poor Jim doesn't appear in it for a pretty long time. But I realize there are two poems that he features in. They're a pair, so I'm going to read them. The first one, this is called On Domesticity. And there's a reference to a children's book. It's Where the Wild Things Are. Everybody remembers classic. It's amazing. You know, the night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. And his mother says, wild thing. And yeah, Max says, I'll eat you up. Anyway, that's how it starts. That was one of my favorite children's books when I was a girl. And so we bought it as, you know, I think when our daughter was just a baby. But that book will feature in this poem. The only other thing I guess I should explain, we currently live in Macon, Georgia. So I grew up in Miami, but I've lived in Georgia for about 20 years now. And there was a period where we felt like we were in exile. We were living up in the mountains of North Georgia. We were teaching at a very small college and living in this strange, to us, very strange place. We were between everybody else's vacation homes. All of the Floridians who have second homes in the mountains, we were in the winter, we were the only people on the top of this mountain, and it was really eerie. It's very Shining-esque. So that's the setting. On Domesticity. Around a blind corner, a shape in the road, dark and crouching, regards my car a half moment, then sprints up the hill into the woods beside our house, where my husband works inside. It's not until it darts that I can name it, Bobcat, that rumor that's haunted our neighborhood, such as it is, for the last year, a specter picking off the groundhogs and feral cats. I call Jim, breathless with what I've seen, and he rushes outside toward the danger, which of course is gone. We are not mountain people. We do not hike or camp or commune with these woods, and how we came to live among other second homes still baffles us. But these glimpses of the wild, fleeting, vicarious, let us feel something more than our usual ennui, that vague longing for the city and restaurants and lights that keeps us from feeling at home. And so we listen for the clicks and howls of the unnamed in the dark. We look for the moving shadows beyond our lawn, perhaps because we know how much our own wildness has been tamed. I remember the fights we used to have, how I'd collapse in tears, how gingerly we would touch each other when we were ready to touch. And then we married and had a child, and there was no point to it, to shaking the calm for the thrill of being right. What wild things are left are in our books. Our daughter has us roar and shake our claws so she can say, "Be still," and silence us. Then the companion poem is called, this is on reading Maurice Sendak instead of Anais Nin. All right, so of course Anais Nin wrote a book of erotica. I wanted to write a poem about sex, the sex of the long married, about desire its departures and returns, by way of the bobcat I met by chance on the curving lane below our house. It bolted, I drove on. Its body, the surprise of it, and my husband's body, his muscular hide, sleek as an animal's, which after all this time should not surprise, but does. I tried to write the poem praising my husband's form, the poem of gratitude, joy even, I'll use that word, but a phrase from a book intruded, a children's book, followed by an actual child, our daughter, dropping her towel, shouting, "Nay, nay," and darting away. And it was her bright, joyful body I followed, laughing out of the poem and the room.
When you have a book coming out, there are all sorts of things that you're worried about. But, if you look at the back, sometimes you'll see that there's an excerpt of, of this is from the poem or this is. And so one of the things that Chelsea and I will do for that is we'll look through each other's manuscripts and try to suggest something. And I remember feeling that way. I'm not in this book at all, but, I had a whole list of quotes and I just stuck my husband's sleek body or whatever that line was, hoping that you would do that one. But if you look at the back of the book, it didn't happen. So I'm going to do, on domesticity made me realize that I have a poem called Domesticity. It's a very short poem, but it's about, it doesn't need any explanation, but I think it speaks to your feline poem there. Domesticity. They came back from their honeymoon and were excited to see, in the absence of their dogs, 2 cats had moved into the backyard. 2 cats and dozens of small, dead animals. And I'm going to, the previous poem was about, not getting physical, I guess. I'm going to do one about getting physical. This is called Hot Sex. So, earmuffs if you're sensitive. Hot sex. They've finished lunch and gone upstairs, where they begin making love, the tender but urgent sex of a married couple with an empty house for an afternoon. They kiss, and he caresses her, but soon she breaks off her soft song of pleasure to say that's hot, which he takes as keep going, but really what she means is that's hot as in burning. And then she asks him, resigned panic in her voice, did you slice one of those serranos into the guac?
You could stop that.
Yeah, he did, he tells her. And then he realizes the implications, tripping over his apologies, but she tells him that stopping makes it worse and pulls him closer. So they're joined, and he feels it too, until they move fast enough, it seems, to outrun the pain, and they're laughing between breaths and moans, laughing at the pain they know will be there when they stop.
One of the great pleasures of our marriages, as David mentioned, is travel. And when I got my Guggenheim Fellowship, I had all this money, and I just didn't want. I have a friend who got one and said they put hurricane shutters on their house, and I really didn't want to do that. And although you probably need them. But what I wanted to do was go to Russia and take the Trans-Siberian Railroad. I love Russian literature, Russian poetry, and I love train travel. And I'd always had this dream of taking the train across Russia. So that's what we did. It was really fantastic. And one of, and I love to visit the houses of writers because I feel like there's still mojo left there. Whenever I visit a writer's house, I think, oh, wow, I can feel Keats here, or I can feel Wordsworth here. And one of the highlights of that trip was visiting Tolstoy's estate, Yasnaya Polanya. And when we were there, I couldn't believe it. It was packed, and there were tour buses pulling up, and lots of people getting out just to visit the great Russian novelist where he lived and maybe get some of that mojo. And so the next summer, David got a grant to follow the Blues Highway from Memphis to New Orleans. And when we were in Memphis, we visited Elvis's house, and I thought, wow, everybody's, there are tour buses pulling up, there are all of these people, women were crying, and I thought, Elvis and Tolstoy, who would have guessed, you know? And also, too, the difference between the two countries. But I have a Russian student now, and so she was talking, you know, of course we talk about what's going on in Russia now, and she was, fomenting about totalitarianism, and I said, well, Olga, how do you explain the Russian love for poetry? And she said to me, Barbara, the soul has to go somewhere. And I thought, oh, wow, that's so beautiful. But when we were in Memphis, and I was trying to write about Katrina. This was in 2000, I think, 12. And it was really hard because so many people had written about it. But somehow or another, this is what happened. Elvis and Tolstoy saved the world. Oh, and I've got to give a shout out to my friend Laura. She and I were talking about earlier about just how travel broadens your horizons, gives you images for poetry, everything, and changes your life really. And she and I have cooked up different trips we're going to take together. So we'll talk about that later. Elvis and Tolstoy saved the world. I'm standing in line waiting for the bus to take me across the street to Graceland when Tolstoy shows up with his white beard and peasant's garb, and I smell him before I see him because, let's face it, Minon's Speedstick was not that big at Yasnaya Polanya, but I recognize him right away, those big ears and the beard like one of the guys in ZZ Top, and I say, Lev Nikolaevich, what are you doing here? And he gives me this mix of a stink eye and what are you doing later, and says, I need to talk to Elvis. And I'm thinking, Tolstoy looked at my boobs, and what's Tolstoy want to say to Elvis at the same moment? And if one more supernatural thing happens, my brain might explode. But we just get on the bus, sit down, and put on our headphones. But I can't stop thinking about how much Elvis and Tolstoy have in common, as in hundreds of people standing in line to tour their houses, and Tolstoy had a favorite daughter, Alexandra, and Chernoff and all of his celibate followers, and Elvis had Lisa Marie and the Memphis Mafia, and there were Priscilla and Sonia, both driven mad by the Great One's sexual inhibitions. So when we arrive at Graceland, which is contrary to my expectations, not cheesy, but a middle-class family home, and the guides tell us to go through the house at our own pace, but not to go upstairs, though. That doesn't stop Tolstoy, who heads right up, and since no one's saying anything to him, I follow along in his wake, and he goes to Elvis's bedroom without knocking or anything, and there's Elvis lying on the bed, but the young Elvis with his sad eyes, and Tolstoy says, Elvis, quit moping around, we've got work to do. And I'm standing over by the closet trying to visualize an Elvis Tolstoy project, but Elvis tells Tolstoy that he can't help him. I'm sad, he says. My mom is dead, and she's the only one who really loved me. My mother just died too, I say, and Elvis's head jerks up. Who's he? He asks. Who's she? He asks Tolstoy, who shakes his head. I don't know, some groupie. Forget her. We have to save the world. What's wrong with it? Elvis says. What's wrong with it? Tolstoy's head explodes and then comes right back together again like some crazy cat cartoon, which gets Elvis's attention. How long since you've been outside, says Tolstoy. I've been dead, said Elvis, but Tolstoy pulls him off the bed. That's no excuse, and I think, groupie? Black Sabbath has groupies, but Tolstoy? And if I were going to be a groupie, I'd be following Chekhov around because he's my kind of guy. He's the kind of guy I'd like to spend time with. But here I am with Tolstoy and Elvis, and both are as crazy as rats in a coffee can. But for dead guys, they're moving fast, and I make a note to amp up my morning walk because I'm huffing as Tolstoy shoves Elvis into the pink Cadillac, and I barely make it into the back seat because Lev Nikolaevich is gunning the engine, heading south on Highway 61 to Natchez and New Orleans because, as everyone knows, that's where the world almost ended on August 29th, 2005, when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast like an apocalyptic medieval shitstorm. And when I look at my watch, the hands are moving backwards fast. The Cadillac speedometer is moving past 80, 100, and we take off into the clouds, which are gray as a Confederate uniform, then black. And Tolstoy says, we have to blast Katrina with our combined mojo, Elvis, or New Orleans will be sucked into the center of the earth. And Elvis says, Jesus Christ. And Tolstoy says, no, man, it's just you and me. And Elvis jerks his head backwards and says, who's she again? And Tolstoy shakes his head and looks into the rearview mirror. She's going to write the poem.
You didn't ask, but I'm an English professor. I have to do some professoring. You probably noticed that there's a lot of leaping in these poems. At Florida State, there must be 10 or a dozen improv comedy groups. And over the years, I've noticed that the students who are in my classes who are poets often do a lot better if they sign up for these workshops, which have people in. They brought in the guy from the Upright Citizens Brigade to show them how to jump from one thing to another, which doesn't mean that all my students' poems are funny, but they do make those kinds of leaps. So whether you're talking about, they're poems about food and they're poems about sex, and but when you can move from a Serrano pepper to the kinds of things that people do, that's a poetic move. And there are lots of poems about Elvis, God knows, and I think there's been a lot of writing about Tolstoy too. But when you put them together in a poem, you get all these. So that's your lesson for those of you who want to go home and write poems today. Billy Collins is somebody I can't say enough about, so I'll just go ahead and back up everything that was said about him earlier. Don't miss him when he comes here. And actually, I might come down and see him too, because I kind of have a beef with Billy. When Billy was poet laureate, he invited us up to the Library of Congress to read. The poet laureate gets to do that. And one of the poems I read up there was a poem about. I'd seen a dog on a street corner with one of those dogs with a cone around his neck. And, if you see a dog, you probably don't want to write a poem about him or her. But when you see a dog with a cone around its neck, you really want to write that poem. You're sort of obliged to. And, but it would also be a very boring poem, at least for me to write directly about the dog and do a dog portrait. So instead, I had the dog speaking and saying, I've got this cone around my neck because they're afraid I'm going to try to bite my bobo. And then I had the dog going around to different people and saying, bite my bobo. And people would scream and run because it was a crazy dog. So Billy picked that up, and for the next couple of days, every time he saw Barbara, he would say, bite my bobo. And back in the old days, I would have called him out on the levee at dawn, but I didn't get a chance to do that or punch him in the nose or anything. So I may have to come back and do that on was it November 2nd? I think something like that. I mentioned earlier there are poems about everything that's physical about love, from arguing to closing a drawer on your sweetheart's finger and not meaning it to the other thing. But I mentioned satisfaction as well. So somebody else recorded a song with that title, but I wrote a poem with that one. Satisfaction. Barbara says, don't let me forget to be happy about such and so. Poem accepted, headstand in the middle of the room instead of against the wall. Big thumbs up, teaching evaluation. Note from a long-lost friend. Now, this is the same Barbara who snuggles up behind me at night as I say, which is when she says, how do you know it's not me and not the clown who lives under the bed? And I scream so loudly I wake the neighbors who deserve to be woken to shits, since they're the ones who lopped a 20-foot branch off of our 200-year-old oak tree, though of course I am more delighted than scared to have such a fun wife. Why is it so hard for us to be happy? I know, because life stinks. Lear says to Cordelia, stay a little, but it's too late. He's speaking to her lifeless body, and he's already lost his mind. There's no joy like that of a kid, of course. One thing I've learned from riding around the park near my house is that if there's a kid on a bicycle and you point and say, I'll race you to that lamppost, every one of them will hunch over their shoulders and start pedaling as though their little lives depended on it. Then there's the young man's love, all ardor. When Apollo chases Daphne and she turns into a tree, he still loves her. And when he places his hand against the trunk, he feels her heart beating beneath the bark and embraces the branches as if they were limbs and kisses the wood, though even as a tree, she shrinks from those kisses. Apollo should have cooled his jets, n'est-ce pas? It says right here in the New York Times that no matter how much in love you are at 20, there's a whole new definition of love that awaits you at 65. And if you knew what it was when you were 20, you'd spend your life being impatient. And if the New York Times doesn't know, who does? After all, it's the newspaper of record. Time does make you see things differently. Can you imagine how Niccolò Polo felt when he saw Venice after 17 years in the court of the great Kublai? All that time he'd been with people who were nice, sure, but they didn't look like him, talk like him, eat the food he ate. And now he's in the Piazza San Marco again, having a drink with his friends, buying a cone of roasted nuts, turning to look at a woman who may have been his lover once and is fat now and missing a tooth, but still beautiful. And sometimes we're sad when we thought we'd be happy. Heavyweight champ Rocky Marciano cried after he defeated the aging Joe Louis because he's glad he'd won, but he knew he'd beaten an old man. No wonder we need someone to remind us to be happy, such as German poet, philosopher, historian, and playwright Friedrich Schiller, author of the Ode to Joy, best known for providing the final moment of Beethoven's Ninth Century Symphony, and whose words address joy, that daughter of Elysium whose shrine we enter fire drunk because her magic binds again what custom's sword had parted, making beggars brothers to princes. Joy drives the wheel in the great clock of worlds, says Schiller, lures flowers from their buds, suns from their firmament. Joy rolls spheres in the spaces that the seer's telescope does not know. She bubbles in the cup whence even cannibals drink. Gentleness, fly from your perches, brothers, when that cup is past, and let the foam spray to the heavens. Uh-oh, Schiller's sounding like Apollo there, isn't he? Yet joy abounds. There's no end to it. All rivers flow into the sea, says Ecclesiastes, yet the sea is not full, though we complain again and again that it is. Can't get no satisfaction, says Mick Jagger, though there is no greater satisfaction than a well-made song. Well-made anything, really. Oh, and someone to like it. Yeah.
Since David mentioned Rocky, I'm going to read a poem. Well, I'm going to read, again, two poems. These are linked, in my mind at least. My most recent book begins with a series of poems. Every one of them, the title begins Introduction to something. So there's Introduction to Captivity, Introduction to Sex Education, Introduction to Home Economics, and so on. They're basically about girlhood. That's so. This one is a Florida poem. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Miami. And so when I was a child, I had an unusual love for the smell of roofing tar. This is called Introduction to Desire. For years, it was the smell of luck, my own, not my rained-on neighbors, that boiling sludge, men pulled from barrels and spread on ailing roofs. From blocks away, I was lured by scent or the glimpse from my mother's car window of drums of tar. The air alive and thrumming like a bush in flower throbbing with bees, the heat rose like a cartoon pie's visible vapors. And like a cartoon character, I drifted from the house, pedaling up and down the street as slowly as I could without falling, because I loved the smell, almost death, almost perfume, dark and vertiginous. I knew enough to feel slightly ashamed. What did the roofers think? In high school, I was reformed by the hurricane. A year of roofing crews on every street at once, the smell following me, clinging to my clothes till I was sick, a betrayal I taste each time I turn down a freshly paved road. So that's the Hurricane Andrew. And my family, we did not evacuate. Andrew hit in August, August 24th, I think, 1992. It was a week before I was supposed to start my senior year of high school. And my father was an air traffic controller. And so I'm just scanning the room to make sure he didn't sneak up here. I don't see him though. He does that sometimes when I give readings in Florida. But he had to stay at the airport to, they had to get all the planes out. And anyway, we all stayed, the whole neighborhood stayed. Oh, not the greatest idea. But this poem is set in Miami, 1993, and there's some references to Sylvester Stallone and eventually a feture story on his home in Miami that was in Architectural Digest. You can see pictures if you're interested. You can find this online. This is called The Locksmith. After the hurricane blew out our doors and windows, and we learned to live in the half-dark of boarded frames, the man who arrived at last to fit the locks on our new glass doors couldn't help tell us how he'd just been inside Sylvester Stallone's new digs and seen splendors we wouldn't believe, fountains and moats and scores of men working. Go right, he said, past Madonna's mansion. He changed the locks there too. Look for the Iron Gate. And though I'd never seen Rocky or Rambo, my family drove past the next weekend, the wonders we hoped to see all locked behind a wall. And I didn't mention that I'd been on that street before. It ended in a waterfront park I knew from another story. A classmate had gone there once alone, probably skipping class, and a stranger blocked the bayside path and took her arm. She broke away, but knew that if she ran, she'd never reach her car. And so she jumped off the seawall, not knowing how deep the water, or if he'd follow and push her under. The man stayed on the shore, and her feet found the bottom. It must have been low tide. So she waded toward the mansions, not yet bought up by singers and movie stars. And the man, who must have sensed a threat, a girl who might do anything, trailed along a while, calling her crazy, then loped away. She said she stayed in the water a long time before climbing back to land. I'd asked why she took judo after school. We were standing by the lockers, and I knew something in her description of the man. I knew I'd seen him too, in that same park, on a day I'd had the fortune not to be alone. A brush with danger, not unlike a brush with fame. Years later, I saw inside Sly's house in the pages of a magazine, and I was struck not by the gardens and pools that matched the locksmith's lavish descriptions, but by the way the actor's face stared back at him out of paintings and statues, making the place a kind of monument to ego as well as excess. They're forever linked in my mind, the laborer, the actor, and the girl, same street, same swath of shore, the difference that power makes, the distance between the kinds of stories men and women tell. Imagine the thrill the locksmith must have felt, crossing the threshold into a better life, a secret he couldn't possibly keep for as long as it took to change the locks and leave. And on the seawall, choices narrowing, imagine my friend poised between action movie hero, all rage and agency, Or action film cliche, another disposable girl. She takes to the air for frame upon frame upon frame, her flight the surest kind of fighting. Thank you. That's a new poem.
When my, the book is coming out or is out, and I realized during the proofing session or whatever, that I had never read the title poem of my first book. It's just long and a little complicated. So I'm going to take care of that here. I'm going to read the title poem of my second book, excuse me, and it's Unusually Grand Ideas. And, it does address depression, if you've ever been on antidepressants or know someone who has been, you get the list of side effects, and none of them seem fun, not that they should be, but you'll see dizziness, that's not any good, loss of appetite, that's not fun, but then you see unusually grand ideas. Well, that's not bad, maybe. But I thought of that, what other unusually grand ideas might there be in this situation? So this is Unusually Grand Ideas. Besides the standard catalog of side effects, weight loss, insomnia, dry mouth, dizziness, the label lists unusually grand ideas, and it isn't long until you have them. First, the idea of the morning when the cardinal you hate for its murderous and often scatological attacks on your car sings and wakes you, and you do not hate being woken or the song and think that, yes, it's possible to separate the art from the artist. And that if it's not, then art redeems us the way the vendors of Krakow redeem the cobblestones on June mornings, spraying them down with their hoses, the night's drunken grime washed away in a beautiful moment of mist and steam. Second, the idea of your own body breathing, a good ache in the legs from yesterday's run, the heart you didn't want to pump still pumping to keep the brain you didn't want to think still thinking. How both of them stayed with you like friends you don't deserve, the kind who endure your most acrid insults and coldest silences, but still pick up the phone. Third, not the idea of love, but its presence, the woman who held you those painful nights as closely as she now holds your sleeping daughter, who fled some nightmare, navigating the 3 a.m. dark to dive into the warmth of this bed and forget those monsters. You remember those fears, what it's like to stand at the doorway of your room before a forest of hissing shadows that want to eat you. Remember the faith that you have to have in your own terror to sprint through that dark to the only place you know will save you. If you get there, which you will, you know it, you will, you have to. So Chelsea and I have a joke, given the last book was about postpartum depression and my book is about clinical depression, we think that the next book is going to be about joy. Maybe. Maybe not joy, but I do have a series of poems that I've been working on where I try to find, the project is gratitude, finding small miracles. I call them secular miracles, and they're dedicated to what I'd call secular saints. So there's the patron saint of airport sparrows, if you know the sparrows that live in the airport. And I'm going to read one called the patron saint of traffic lights, which he needs to visit here, by the way, or she. And I'll say this, it deals with our daughter, who's 11 now, fainted and fell backwards, hit her head, and got a concussion. And there was this poem is about the frantic sort of run to the emergency room. And she's fine now. That's what I need you to know, because I don't want you to worry. She, texts and asks for money in her debit card and things like that. She's totally good. But this is the patron saint of traffic lights. My child is in the back seat with her mother and can't understand what's happening. Keeps forgetting we've already told her that she fainted and hit her head hard on our living room stone floor. That we're going to the hospital downtown that has a special doctor for kids, but everything will be all right. And though she doesn't believe our reassurances, knows, even concussed, that we would lie to calm her, she listens each time until we pause And then she blinks, and the awful loop repeats itself. What happened? Where are we going? But what's also happening is that all the lights are green and have been green for miles, each one ushering us on, some turning right before I'm about to brake, some not needing to change, unblinking eyes watching us approach from far down the street, the same street I will drive on much later when all will be well, when my daughter will know what happened and I will be late for a meeting or so hungry that just thinking will feel like anger and the light will stop me. And as promised, I won't curse or hit the steering wheel. I won't even sigh, but instead will look up and remember the small miracle I received when I needed it, and that pauses like these are also needed to revive my gratitude, which should be ongoing, steady, constant, without end.
Sean mentioned my latest book, which is Holo Holo, which is the Hawaiian word for walking out with no destination in mind, which I wish I could do more of, but it's the epitome of Hawaiian culture. And I lived in Hawaii from the age of 10 to 18. So I grew up there, and I love the culture, love the language, the pidgin of Hawaii. And my book of stories is set in Honolulu. And it has a beautiful cover, I think. It's by my dear friend Stuart Reardon, and who died last year. And she was just one of the most beautiful artists in the world. And she's done the cover, I think, for 4 of my books. But actually, I think that this group is kind of the epitome of one of the things I really love in life, which is a party. People getting together, they have, and you just never know what's going to happen. And I've used to feel kind of ashamed that I had so many party poems, because, that makes me kind of frivolous, right? But then I became, in the last couple of years, enamored of the Latin poet, ancient Roman poet Horace. And when I started delving into his work, he's got tons of party poems. And I thought, oh, wow, if it's good enough for Horace, it's good enough for me. So this is one of my party poems, and it's called Ode on Words for Parties, American Edition. Why do we have so many words for parties? A slew of them once you start looking: shindig, bash, meet and greets, raves, blowouts, barbecues, and more tepid functions, receptions, luncheons, and dues of all kinds. But let's face it, most people have no clue about how to throw a party. Like the friend who was complaining because her husband wanted to have lots of food at the brunch they were planning, but she knew people didn't go to parties to eat. And Marcia and I had to break it to her that brunch was the combination of 2 meals, so her guests were expecting to eat double, and you can't believe the shock on her face. But her husband put out a great spread, and everyone ate and talked. Though we've all been to those parties with the bowl of dead chips and the onion dip that looks like cat vomit on the driveway. Actually, not that good. But my sister throws a fabulous party because she's a great cook and has an army of wine bottles that never stops marching, and her garden is verdant, and she has a pool, which some people end up in at the end of the night. What would be the word for that kind of party? Vino cool pool party? And the other one might be a kitty dip party. And the guests, they can ruin a party too. Think of the music Nazis who make their way through the world with their one-upmanship, and your collection of Van Morrison and Jimi Hendrix is so uncool compared with the Mud Stumps and Echo Park, but only before they caved and became famous and were no longer cool. Then there are the couples who are glued at the hip, like twins conjoined by church and state, or the bloviators, or the drunks who can turn a party into a Godzilla Stomps Tokyo apocalypse, like the time the guy with the Ponderosa belt buckle slid chest first in a dance move and put a gouge 3 feet long on my hardwood floor. And I hadn't even invited him. He was my hairdresser's friend. That party was over. I wanted everyone out of my house. Or what about the people who live in the middle of nowhere and you know that on the way home you'll end up in Hades or a ditch, and if you're lucky, what would you call those? Suburban hell parties? Hansel and Gretel lost weekend parties? I often try to talk my husband into pulling over so we don't crash, but he reminds me that we're just setting ourselves up for the serial killers who roam lonesome highways looking for poets. And what would you call that concatenation of events? A Zodiac after party stab fest, post bash, head bash? You can see that when I'm not going to parties, I'm watching way too many true crime shows, which make you mistrust your fellow human beings in the most basic way possible. Yet we continue to throw parties, which is an interesting choice of verbs. And English is full of them. Throw a party, pitch a fit, pitch a tent, pitch a no-hitter, pitch in, pitch black. And that's what the road is like now. And I'd give anything to be at that kitty dip party 2 blocks from my house with the Einstein brains blaring on the sound system so I can't hear the guy talking about how he prepares petri dishes for his research, or the woman who's describing an airline ticket fiasco that wouldn't even be interesting if it had happened to me. But I guess that's life. A continuum between darkness and mala folla, a Spanish phrase that describes an indifference so profound that it can't be bothered with scorn. But I remember one of the best parties ever was a wine tasting put together by an Australian father and son. And by the end, everyone was dancing to Tutti Frutti and screaming drunk and in love with the world. And I danced with a roly-poly lawyer named Booter, who I never saw again. And the hangover the next day was a small price to pay for that crazy mix of Little Richard and Cabernet. And there was food, yeah, but who remembers what? Okay. I want to emphasize, too, that you really don't want to miss Billy Collins. He's so wonderful. I read with him at the 92nd Street Y in New York. He invited me to open for him, and reading for Billy Collins' audience was so much fun. Man, they were there ready to have fun. So you're going to have fun when he reads to you. David, you're going to... Yeah? Okay.
I have another little shorty one that I'm going to end up with here, but first I just want to say there are 2 great men in the Western Hemisphere. One's Billy Collins and one is Sean Sexton, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause. I do want to thank Sean and Sarah and Ren and everyone else who made this wonderful weekend possible for us. And again, I want to thank you for coming out. It's a little too late to go kayaking, but we can sure have barbecue and a drink afterwards. I'm going to read a poem called, this is going to be the last number today. This is a poem called Frida Loves Diego, because the Frida Kahlo show over in the Dali Museum is not that far away from this part of Florida, and the optics of Frida and Diego are pretty remarkable, because she was this tiny little sweet thing and he was just a gigantic kind of guy, and he was gigantic in other ways too. I think I'm going to mention that in the poem, but it opens with something that I overheard at a dinner party. This is the first line of the poem. And again, thank you all for being here. He does it very gently, in the French way, says the woman across the table. And when I look up and smile, she says, I was talking about opening oysters. Okay, but still. Frida Kahlo says, you deserve a lover who goes to paradise every time he looks into your eyes, one who brings you hope, coffee, and poetry. She would say that, wouldn't she? Since her lover was that big fat slob Diego Rivera, the foremost muralist of his time, yet not what anyone would call great husband material. And what a waistband! In some photos, tiny Frida is embracing big Diego, her little head resting on his enormous stomach. Ha ha! He looks like an elephant, and she like the little cat who is the elephant's best friend in some of your more popular pet videos. Yet he must have had something going for him. Frida met Diego in 1927 when she was an art student, and soon their relationship became intimate. Their marriage was tumultuous. Both had multiple affairs. Frida had affairs with both men and women, though Diego only had affairs with women. Some would give him points for that, except that one of the women was Frida Kahlo's younger sister, Christina, which, as her biographer says, quote, infuriated Frida. Frida says, you deserve a lover who makes you feel safe, who can consume this world whole if he walks hand in hand with you, and who believes that his embraces are a perfect match with your skin. But notice she says, deserve over and over, and you, so you deserve is what she says, not I have. Frida and Diego divorced in 1939, but remarried a year later. Although their second marriage was as troubled as the first, they remained married till her death in 1954. Diego was more famous in their lifetimes, yet Frida is thought of as the better artist today. The French way of opening oysters means leaving some brine in the shell so you can taste the sea. When we taste our loves, does not the whole earth enter our mouths? Sea, forest, library, sky. What we deserve and what we have aren't always the same thing. Between what we have and what we deserve is the space where we paint our paintings, build our buildings, write our poems. Between what we have and what we deserve is what we never wanted in the first place, but is better. Thank you. Well,
So, for those of you who would rather have barbecue than poetry, it's your day, it's your time. Thank you so much. Thank you. You were all fabulous.
That was terrific, thank you. The Cajuns call it lagniappe. So a little lagniappe, if you don't mind. In a few years ago on the Writer's Almanac, Garrison Keillor read one of Jim's poems, and I happen to have it here, and I'd like for you to read it. It's entitled The Late News, and we're going to end with a cheer, if you don't mind.
Jim?
I'm sorry. Oh my goodness, what I hit.
David?
David Kirby, yes. Oh. David, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Got it written right here.
Jim, you could read it.
Yeah.
Doesn't Jim have a great voice?
No cover songs.
A little lagniappe. It's called The Late News. Do you remember it?
I guess so, yeah. That is my name there, yeah.
Yeah, David Kirby. I am so
Okay.
sorry.
No, you got it.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking Jim is, this wouldn't mean anything to my students, but Jim could read the Vero Beach phone book and it would sound good. And they would say, what's the phone book, right? So I'll do my best Jim May impression.
Yeah.
The Late News. The anchorman is unsmiling, even somber, for her biggest stories are about death. And even when she has a feature on a 12-year-old college student or a gorilla who understands sign language, there's something tentative about her relief. She knows that the great antagonist will strike again and soon. The TV weatherman smiles a lot, but he's making the best of a bad thing, for the weather is necessary, yes, but boring. As for the actors in the commercials on television, they are jovial yet insincere, for they do not love the lotions, sprays, and gargles they urge us to buy, products that are bad for us anyway and overpriced. Only the sportscaster is happy, for sports news is good news. Money always changes hands, and if someone has lost that day, someone else has won. Should anyone die? That's death, not sports. And death is the anchorwoman's department. Even if the Soviets should fire all their missiles at us and vice versa, the sportscaster will still be happy. You can't cover everything in a half hour, for Christ's sake, and sports will be all that is left. There will be no jobs to go to. Our cars won't work. There will be no electricity. But you can make a ball out of anything. Then all you need is a line to get it across or a hoop to put it through. The sportcaster knows how the world would end. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with a cheer. Thanks.